Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 364 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing Season 2 of the TV show Star Trek Discovery. And this will involve spoilers for all of Season 2, so just be aware of that. And we previously discussed Season 1 back in episode 285, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Anthony Ha, making his 12th appearance on the show. He covers media, advertising, and pop culture for the news site TechCrunch, where he also hosts the podcast Original Content. A chapbook of his short stories called Love Songs for Monsters was published by Youth in Decline in 2014, and he has a story forthcoming in Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet. So Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm happy to be back.
Then next up, we've got Sara Lynn Michener, making her 11th appearance on the show. She's a Ravenclaw Trekkie maker feminist who writes at Medium and lives in Northern California with a Renaissance engineer, a dog, and a bird. She considers Star Trek to be her third and best parent. So Sara, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
And also joining us today is Chris Cevasco, making his 9th appearance on the show. From 2003 to 2009, he was the editor of Paradox, the magazine of historical and speculative fiction, and his short fiction has appeared in magazines such as Nightmare and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. He's also written 3 historical thrillers, all of which he's currently shopping around to agents, and his new Dungeons & Dragons supplement, Felosiel's Ultimate Guide to Poison, is available now through the DM's Guild website. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Okay, so Chris has never been on the show to discuss Star Trek before, so I thought we would just start out. And Chris, why don't you just tell us a bit about your background as a Star Trek fan?
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself a huge Star Trek fan. And interestingly, I, as a kid, was always aware of the original series, before Next Generation came on the air. But I actually had not watched it religiously. I had probably only caught sporadic episodes here and there over the years. And it was really through Next Generation was my gateway drug into, Trek fandom. And after that, I went back and watched the original series as well, and have watched all the series since then multiple times probably, and the films and whatnot. And I'm a huge fan.
So I have this, I don't know if this memory is correct or not, but I have this vague memory that we were all out to dinner one time, and you were telling people that actually you thought maybe Voyager was your favorite Star Trek series. Am I just making that up?
I don't know if you're making it up, but I wouldn't say that. No, for sure. I liked Voyager. I would say, interestingly enough, Discovery is becoming definitely vying for the top spot now as one of my favorite Star Trek incarnations. But I would say it would either have to be Next Generation or Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hard to pick a favorite. I know I've mentioned like half of them right now.
Well, and then Anthony and Sara were both on our previous Star Trek Discovery panel, but Chris, you weren't. So I'm just curious, and I guess I'll explain. So in our previous Star Trek Discovery panel, we just discussed the first 9 episodes, and then there was like the mid-season break, and we stopped there. So people haven't gotten our thoughts on the second half of Season 1. So I thought I would just start off with you and just ask you, what did you think of Season 1 overall, and just particularly the second kind of movement of it?
Right. Well, I mean, I definitely think it started to pick up speed with the second movement. I still was not entirely sold on it by the end of the first season, although I was guardedly optimistic with regard to where it was going. I definitely think it's significantly improved in the second season. Oddly enough, I will just mention that I thought that the pilot episode, the 2-part major episode that's introduced Season 1, I thought was one of the worst episodes of any Star Trek series I had ever seen. I thought it was almost painfully and embarrassingly bad to watch.
I will fight you later.
Only because I felt it was chock full of, as you know, Bob dialogue and that type of thing. And I thought, the performances, as strong as they were, couldn't really elevate. I just thought it was really, really poorly written. I kind of wish they had just done away with that entire 2-part opening and just started with the next episode. And I thought it would have been a stronger opening. But in any event, it definitely grew on me the more I watched it. And now, again, I think the second season is, has made sort of a light year jump ahead of the first one.
Yeah, I just went back and re-listened to the previous Star Trek Discovery panel that we did, and it was sort of reminding me that I kind of had mixed feelings about, the first half of season 1. I thought there was a lot about it that was really solid, and then there were a lot of things that, I was kind of like, on. And I hadn't watched Discovery since we did that panel, so I went and I binged the second half of season 1 and all of season 2 in like 3 or 4 days or something. So, I might have some of the stuff a little mixed up. But I thought, starting with the second half of season 1, I thought it got really good. I mean, I like more the sort of dark political machinations and, things like that. And so I liked that a lot of the fan theories that I thought would be an interesting direction to explore. They went in that direction. So they made, we had talked about is Ash a Klingon sleeper agent, and that turned out to be true. And is Lorca from the Dark Mirror universe, and that turned out to be true. And I had been really sad when the Philippa Georgiou character was killed right at the beginning, because I thought she was going to be a part of this series. And so then when she came back, I was really excited about that. I guess I don't know if anyone's listening to this who hasn't watched the show, but I guess maybe I'll just say that, or who hasn't, if you haven't watched the show, maybe go back and listen to our previous panel. But then they do end up in the Dark Mirror universe where there's like an evil version of every character, and the captain turns out to be from the Dark Mirror universe, and it all just gets really, lots of backstabbing and sort of Game of Thrones kind of stuff going on. So how about, Sarah, what did you think of the pick up where we left off on that panel, and what did you think of the second half of season 1?
I thought it was great. I totally, it's funny. My biggest problem with season 1 in its entirety is that the way that they handled the Ash Tyler reveal, like, why not just say that, they did all this neurological surgery, like work to, put Vulk inside of Ash's existing body. Like, the fact that they sort of carved up a Klingon and made it look human is way more implausible than the idea that they would just, use the existing, because it had been an existing Starfleet, person, like, why not just use his body? And so the fact that they sort of carved up a Klingon and made him, go through all of this torture to look like a human, to me was much less plausible than the idea that they would just sort of put his brain inside of a human's body or something like that. So that was actually the thing that I was least comfortable with regarding season 1. But I would like to say that I love the way that season 1 opened, because I felt like it's the sort of standard Star Trek and the standard storytelling way of doing things to say, to start with the third episode, basically, and tell all of the first 2 episodes in flashbacks. And that is traditionally what we would ordinarily see. And so I feel like it was a really bold choice to start with those first 2 episodes that pretend like we're going to get a story about Georgiou. We're going to have a story about, the Shenzhou, the ship that they were on before. So, I really appreciate that they did that. I thought it was a really wonderful creative choice. But yeah, I mean, my main issue with that season is something I rarely hear. People never complain about the Ash thing, but I just felt like it sets up the expectation that medical tech is way more advanced than it actually is around that time. And so then all of the other medical things that they have later, you're kind of like, well, why can't they just fix that if they have the technology to just completely build a human, outside of a Klingon? Why don't they just do that? So I feel like because they did that, there's just an element of the science fiction goes so far it becomes unbelievable.
Yeah, so I don't want to relitigate the beginning of season 1. Like, we're past that. So no time traveling back to then. So we're just going to have to, take it for granted that Chris and Sarah disagree on this point. But so Anthony, what did you think of the Ash Tyler Klingon sleeper agent reveal?
I liked that as a twist because I think there had been, as you said, a lot of fan theories about it, and I was definitely all on board. I was disappointed with how they handled it because it felt like, and now we're talking about episodes that I haven't watched since they aired, I guess, about a year ago, so I may get some of the details wrong, but from what I can recall, basically he gets put in, the equivalent of the brig or whatever, isolated in some way, and he's basically like off stage for a lot of those final episodes. So I remember being unsatisfied because basically there's this big reveal, and then they don't really do anything with it. And also to Sarah's point that it was just a very convoluted reveal, because it was not just, oh, he's really Vogue, or oh, like Vogue's like memories have been implanted, but this sort of idea of these two personalities in this human body that was created from a Klingon body, and it just felt like it was a lot to ask of the viewer, and then they didn't do enough with it.
I guess around the other thing around that I didn't care for at all was that he kills Hugh. And I just felt like that happened really fast. And I wasn't crazy about really anything that happened with that whole storyline of Hugh being dead and spoiler warning, coming back to life. I don't know. Am I alone there? Or I don't know, Chris, what'd you think of that, of Ash killing Hugh?
Well, no, I mean, I actually thought it was a pretty powerful twist, because it added an entire other layer of kind of emotional complexity to both the character, what he's going through, his relationship to other characters, particularly Stamets and whatnot on the ship, and the fact that it all kind of happened fast. It didn't bother me, because I think it fit with the fact that he was, in a very strange mental place where he kind of wasn't in control of his own thoughts, and in that moment, his sort of short-circuiting brain circuitry, got the better of him. So no, I actually, that worked for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how much of my things, it was just like so nice for me to see a loving gay relationship on Star Trek, and for it to turn all like, emo and unhappy and everything. I kind of like just liked it better when they were happy. I mean, I know like
I think that's why they were really smart to have Wilson Cruz and Anthony Rapp explain pretty much right away. Like the next morning, Wilson Cruz was, basically said, hey, he's coming back. And I think he must have cleared it with, Discovery's brass and said, look, this is going to be, there's going to be some backlash to this, the whole, kill your gays trope. It's going to be a problem. And so if we're going to do this, we should let the fans know almost immediately that there's more coming and to trust us.
Yeah, since I binged this all, I didn't see any of that stuff, but then I found out he was alive again, just like 6 hours later or something. So, I mean, it was all right, I guess. But I don't know, Anthony, what do you think?
Yeah, I wasn't crazy about I guess in general, I'm not wild about having characters die and come back, because that feels a little cheap to me. And I think the fact that they had to sort of immediately publicly declare that this was going to be walked back is not a great sign that it was a really strong storytelling choice. But I thought where it went, not so much in terms of how they brought him back, but what happens after they bring him back in season 2 and how the relationship evolves in those later episodes. That stuff I thought was really interesting and pretty strong.
I guess that's another thing is, there's this line that, well, I didn't like at all the part where Ash and Hugh were like sprawling in the cafeteria or whatever. But then there's a part after that where Saru says something like, I'm sorry, sir, there's no Starfleet regulations for how like Klingon sleeper agent and a guy who just came back from the dead, or how you're supposed to deal with this. And it's like, yeah, that is sort of just like piling one thing on, like sort of one, I don't know, I felt I was going a little too far with, characters dying and coming back to life and that kind of stuff.
I mean, this is Star Trek. They have a wonderful, grand history of bringing characters back to life.
Right, but I like it better when there's like, I don't know, like a whole movie, in between or something. But I don't know.
Even then, it wasn't that great.
Maybe I'm just being grouchy. All right, so how about? I mean, one thing I'm not grouchy about is I really liked in the Mirror Universe how Tilly was like this warlord, like space captain. The alternate version of her. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was fun to do with her character, especially because she was obviously so opposite of that in every way in the Prime universe.
Anyone else have anything else that they liked about sort of toward the end of season 1?
I'll just mention that in terms of that, what you just said with Tilly, for the many sort of interesting quirks and whatnot that her character has, I was actually really impressed just with the way she was able to, obviously she's playing Tilly one way, she's playing the warlord another way, but then what I thought was really interesting to watch on screen was how our, the primary universe Tilly then had to pretend to be the warlord, and the kind of blending of those two personalities that you got in that was actually, I thought I had the most fun watching that.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Tilly in season 2. I remember I was sort of like lukewarm on her in season 1, but I don't know if she grew on me or if the character was different or anything in season 2, but I just loved her in these season 2 episodes.
Yeah, I agree that I don't know that she's my favorite character, because there's actually a lot of strong competition for that, but she was definitely one of my favorite elements in pretty much all of these episodes.
Yeah. Who else are some of your favorite? Let's get into season 2, because I know that's what everyone's here to find out about, our thoughts about season 2. So, Anthony, going into season 2, who would you say were some of your favorite characters in the show?
Well, so again, not to relitigate old stuff, but I will just say really quickly, the very end of season 1 left a really bad taste in my mouth, and I really hated the finale and thought it just rushed. And the way they just sort of wrapped up the Klingon War so quickly left a bad taste in my mouth. And so I actually hadn't watched season 2 until I found out we were doing this episode, and then kind of binged all of them. So I went in with relatively low expectations. I mean, probably Saru was probably the one element who kind of I liked about season 1 that kind of I carried over into season 2. Although that was one of the things I was sort of suspicious of going in, was the fact that, it seemed like they were setting up Saru to be the captain, only to have that ripped away fairly quickly. But I was actually really, really happy with the direction they took Saru in this season. And I was in general kind of skeptical of Captain Pike and of all the Enterprise stuff, but I thought that was also handled really well.
Yeah, I agree with you that I was underwhelmed by the finale of season 1. I also agree with you that Saru is possibly my favorite character. I just really like in Star Trek the sort of quiet professionalism. I don't want people this is just my personal taste, but I don't want people like squabbling or like getting angry with each other or whatever. I want to watch people who are really smart and really competent, dealing with problems and working together to solve them. And I feel like Saru is, even though he's in all the weird makeup and everything, he's almost the most believable character in the show. Like that, I believe more than any of the other characters that he's actually in Starfleet, and this is his job, and this is what he does every day, and he takes it seriously and everything like that. How about Chris? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely agree that Saru is one of my favorite characters. I actually really, she's more of a minor character, but I love Tig Notaro's portrayal of Reno, the sort of curmudgeonly engineer. I feel like she's kind of channeling that cantankerousness of Bones in a way that it almost seems like more Bones than Bones. And it's just so much fun to watch her whenever she's on screen. I actually think that I was similarly skeptical. I was like, oh man, are we going to have this all be the Pike show once you find out Pike is on there? And then I was really, really charmed by the way Anson Mount plays that character. I think he did a phenomenal job. So he ended up being a character that I did not expect at all I was going to like, and I actually really thought he ended up being a complex, interesting character. And the other character I'll just mention is, I actually think that there are like 2 or 3 characters that I think, because of the way they interact with Burnham, were fascinating to me. And it was basically the 3 members of her family. I think Spock and Sarek and Amanda, all I just was completely riveted whenever any one of those 3 was on the screen, particularly because they each had such unique and complicated relationships with Burnham, and just watching the way those relationships developed was one of the main and the strongest through lines in season 2 that I think kept pulling me through it.
Now, so Anthony was kind of alluding to this, but do you think that the plan originally was to have Saru become the captain, and then in response to fan response that they're like, we need to include more familiar elements in season 2? We need to have Captain Pike and we need to have Spock, or do you think that was the plan all along? Or I don't know if Sarah, do you have any idea or any suspicions?
I definitely think that some of the dialogue, I don't know whether or not they added any kind of like I doubt very much that they brought on the whole idea of Pike and Spock in order to deal with the backlash, because the backlash was minor financially for them. Okay, like it was loud on the internet, but it really didn't affect the overwhelming success of the show. So, unless they're terribly, terribly concerned about the optics of these people who will complain no matter what, I seriously doubt it. However, the producer did say, I think Kurtzman said, that he added a couple of lines of dialogue to sort of placate the people who are upset. Like, they added the line about the hair growing after the Klingons growing out their hair after the war. And what's hilarious is I am a member of several Star Trek groups, and one of the things that I found hilarious is that the people who were complaining were basically saying they're listening to us. They added this for us, and I'm like, they're making fun of you by adding it. Like, they're basically saying that, that, oh my God, they can't believe they had to include a line of exposition so obvious in order to clear this up. And any sort of plot discrepancies or canon inconsistencies that can be addressed so simply are by definition not important. We don't need to know why the Klingons didn't have hair, in season 1 and have hair in season 2. We could have even inferred that fact about, them having it shaved during the war.
But so if the fans hadn't complained, do you think the plan was always for the Klingons to have hair in season 2, or was just the idea of them having hair, was that a fan
I
thing?
don't know. I just know that Kurtzman said in an interview that they added that line to sort of, calm down the fans who were upset about it.
So what did everyone, let's see, Chris said you liked Captain Pike. I thought he was awesome. I also had sort of like, wasn't looking forward to the character that much, but he was so charming. I want him to be my captain on a starship. Like, that just seems like such a good time. Anthony, what'd you think about Captain Pike?
Yeah, I thought he was terrific. And like I said, I was sort of skeptical going in, and I'd also seen a few episodes of The Inhumans, which is one of the worst television shows I've ever seen, in which he plays Black Bolt, who is completely silent. And I mean, I don't think it's necessarily his performance that's the problem, but like, given that was the major role I saw him in, I was like, this is not gonna go well. But like, from the moment he's on screen, he like completely owns it. And I mean, I don't necessarily think that Pike has a super defined character just from, the handful of other appearances that we've seen him, but I did like him as this sort of, a captain sort of in the Kirk mold, but maybe a little bit less emotional, a little more supportive of the crew. And it was definitely just like a cap. I was like, yes, I'm happy when I see you on screen, and I would happily serve on your ship.
Well, for people who don't know, let's just say where we've seen him before. So this character originates in the original Star Trek, the original series pilot, and then Paramount didn't like him, and so they recast him as as Captain Kirk. And then my understanding is that at some point they ran out of scripts and they were kind of desperate, and so they took the original pilot, which was called The Cage, and they adapted it into a 2-part special called The Menagerie, where they created this frame story, and then they used footage from the from The Cage in that. And so basically our 2 points of reference for Captain Pike is that he was the captain of the Enterprise when they went down to this planet Talos 4, where there were these like aliens with large heads who had amazing telepathic powers. And then from the Menagerie, we also see that he's in some sort of horrific accident and is confined to a sort of motorized wheelchair kind of thing, and is badly scarred and can't speak, can only sort of respond by having a little light shine based on his brainwave patterns to express what he wants. And I thought that, given that that's all, and then I guess we see him in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. I don't know if there's anything else, but that's what I'm familiar with. But I thought, given that those are our reference points, I thought they did an amazing job of developing that character in a really compelling way and making that, the bits of information that we do have about him meaningful.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually think the fact that they decided to, the choice of giving him that flash of awareness of his future with the time crystal, where he now knows where he's headed, apparently, in terms of his injury. I think that's one of those things, like you were talking about before, one of these really dark psychological twists that the show took that I thought is just mind-blowingly awesome. I mean, just the idea that he's now carrying that baggage around adds another whole layer to all of the choices he makes going forward. And then in terms of the other aspect of his character, how charming he was, again, I feel like in some ways, a lot of the things that I find endearing or interesting about all the characters, again, I feel like it gets back to the fact that Burnham, really sort of remains the kind of emotional heart of the show. And a lot of why I find him so charming is the sort of the ways that he interacts with Burnham, and almost becomes kind of like, not quite a father figure, but, how he interacts with her is a lot of how we get his character revealed. And I think that is true of a lot of the other characters in the show. It all kind of comes back to how they interact with Burnham, whether you're talking about, her love interest, who I'm blanking on his name, the Ash, yeah. Or any of the other characters. I mean, so many of them are kind of defined. They're all defined by their relationships with Burnham, including Saru. I mean, there's a lot of that on screen as well.
Yeah, let me just say about the moment where Captain Pike has to decide whether to take the time crystal, and he knows that by taking it, he's locking himself into this horrifying future. I just thought that was maybe my favorite moment in season 2. Certainly it was up there. No, it wasn't, but it's certainly up there. But it was just, yeah, and that's what I like. Like I was saying, part of the reason I like Star Trek is I like seeing these people be noble and, be willing to sacrifice themselves and be a better version of humanity than we typically deal with. And that was, that moment sort of epitomized that for me.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Anything else to say about Captain Pike before we move on to the other characters?
I think it was an interesting thing, when you said that Paramount didn't initially like the guy who played Pike. What's funny is that guy was a way better actor, I'm sorry, objectively, than Shatner ever was. So it's kind of funny that, when you watch the pilot as a modern audience, you can't help but be like, damn, it's too bad they didn't keep this guy. I mean, I enjoy Shatner for what he brings to the table, but I feel like what they were trying to say is that he's too good of an actor for 1966, and that 1966 really wanted that sort of, fake persona style that was so prevalent in the films and TV at the time, where, actual acting was almost seen as a detriment. But yeah, I mean, I think that, I was very pleased to see the Spock and the Pike character. I was a little disturbed by the petition to launch a Pike series, just because along with that petition, there was like a fan petition that came out asking that we get a Pike and Spock show because of the popularity of these characters. And I totally understand that. I agree with how charming they were. And I think one of the strong suits of Discovery in general is the casting is amazing. I mean, the side characters that they bring in are just on point, and they really do a wonderful job of, adding to the overall story and the overall character arcs. But there was something a little disturbing about, what came along with that petition is a lot of people saying that they wanted Pike instead of Discovery. And that was troublesome to me, because I feel like there's a very large contingent of Star Trek fans that want nostalgia more than they want Star Trek.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree, like, much as I loved Pike in this, I feel like his story, we know everything we need to know. I don't need to see any more of it. Let me just say, though, about the casting, because I read William Shatner's memoir, and he was saying that the issue that they had with the original Captain Pike was that he was sort of just a naturally dignified, reserved sort of actor. And then you have him playing off Spock, who's also naturally reserved, dignified kind of actor. And it was just sort of like, it was just too much of the same thing. And so if you have Spock playing off William Shatner, who's like boisterous and sort of a ham and everything, that it just has a more kind of engaging energy to have that contrast.
That's funny.
Well, and also if you watch Spock in the cage versus the rest of the original series, he definitely becomes much more reserved in those later, in the rest of the show, versus in the cage, where I think they're still finding the character. He, is a lot shoutier, a lot more emotional. And I think Leonard Nimoy has said in interviews that it was very much like, well, I had to sort of do that in that context. But once I had this, read between the lines, really hammy, overacting captain, I could really do this very understated performance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we haven't really talked about the plot at all. It's like so complicated. I don't even know how much I want to get into it. But I'll just say very quickly, they're getting these sort of like red bursts of light that are appearing at different points in space that seem to be leading them, seems to be sort of helping them out or leading them to where they need to go. And that's basically sort of the first half of season 2. So let's just put a pin in that for a second. But like sticking with Spock, what did you guys think of the way that Spock was portrayed in this show? Because I liked the character, but he seemed much different than the Leonard Nimoy Spock, who seems to me very kind of, good-natured and wise and, imperturbable. And this Spock seemed very like angry and intense.
Well, he's supposed to be younger, which I think is part of it. Like, he's still developing into the Spock that we, come to know and love. But I also think that the show has a responsibility to not, again, delve too much into nostalgia and just try to find copies of, original performances. And it's a much bolder choice to find somebody who channels just enough of those energies and just enough of, the various depictions by Spock that we've seen by now over the decades, without trying to outright copy him or replace him. So I feel like, Discovery in general with the casting, obviously, I just said they do such a good job. And Ethan Peck was such a fantastic, idea to fill those shoes. I mean, he did a wonderful job. But I do think that the differences were a strength and not a detriment to the series. And, for them to be like, we're going to do something different with him and we're going to, explore real sibling relationships, real dynamics between Spock and Burnham. So
even like where he's smashing up the chessboard, I don't know. He's a Vulcan, or he's like half Vulcan.
Well, yeah, but he's also half human. I wouldn't smash up a chessboard, and I'm not even half Vulcan. I mean, he's half human, and
I would
the
smash
way
up
that the series.
What do you call it? Monopoly. I would smash up a Monopoly board. Man, that game makes me furious. So if they made a Monopoly, that would have been a lot more plausible.
Right. Because then you could channel all your anger at capitalism into the Monopoly board.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that Discovery does well is they're looking at some of the things that were actually detractions from the previous iterations of Star Trek that we never saw it that way, right? Like, I am seeing more of the flaws of TNG, for instance, the one that I grew up on and loved. I mean, I watched the pilot when I was 8 years old on the living room floor. It's this indelible memory that I have, right? But TNG had flaws, and the more that I watch Discovery, the more I see those flaws through the differences. And part of that is this sort of like colonialistic spirit of, well, we've figured everything out as a human race, and we're just here to solve problems for other races that haven't figured that out, right? And so I feel like because they have come in and said, Star Trek Discovery, for instance, we're dealing with trauma. We're not just like, oh, something bad happens to the character and the next episode they're perfectly fine, which was one of the demands of having this serialized, format that they had where every episode was like a short story. And that was fine. That totally worked in the 80s. But I feel like we need, what Discovery is doing now. And it's more real. So to get back to what we're talking about Spock, we never really saw Spock struggle with his humanity. He just accepted it, and he sort of arrived having gotten, to the place of peace with it. And it was more of a struggle for the other characters. But it makes sense that this child growing up on Vulcan would struggle with both halves, that there would be this opposition, that there would be groups that were threatened by even Spock's existence. So I really think that, that to me, even though he's, knocking over a chessboard, it makes sense that, he'd be like, having grown up on Vulcan, told to repress all of these things, where he has moments where it explodes. And this happened in the Kelvin films as well. And both times I agree with it. I think it's a more realistic choice.
So, Chris, what do you think of Spock?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it worked really well, and I thought it worked organically with what we've seen before, because I agree. It was like young Spock still coming to terms with reconciling the two sides of his nature, and kind of becoming the person that we all knew from the original series. And I like that. I think we're kind of left with the idea that a lot of what we consider to be Spock's sort of iconic personality grew out of, again, I keep harping on this, but his relationship with his sister. And I mean, there's even, gosh, it's been now like a few weeks since I saw the final episode, but I think Burnham's last words to him, I remember at the time that I was watching it, thinking to myself, like, oh man, that is like, she gives him some piece of advice that basically, it's sort of like she's telling him, like, hey, we the readers know, it's like a wink, wink. Hey, make sure that you put up with the kind of nonsense you're going to get from people like McCoy later on and stuff. And it's like, I should have looked it up before we had this talk, but it's very clear that this relationship with his sister was sort of one of the defining relationships in his life, and shapes the person that he goes on to become.
I want to pick up on what Sarah was saying about how this show is about characters dealing with trauma, because I guess another thing I sort of wonder about is, Spock is seeing these visions, and then also Tilly is seeing these visions, and they both think that they must be, having mental illness or something. Mm. And I just feel like, isn't aliens a more likely explanation, just given all these characters have experienced? And, there doesn't seem to be any sort of mental health counseling or anything on the ship, which seems sort of odd to me. I mean, there's a scene where who is it? I think it's Dr. Culber. He goes to the Admiral and says, like, didn't you used to be a therapist? I need to talk about this. And it's like, why does he need to talk to the Admiral? Like, don't they have any
Well, there's no ship's counselor in TOS. And I mean, a ship's counselor doesn't show up until TNG, right? So we have to assume that if it wasn't a part of the crew complement in TOS, it wouldn't be a part of the crew complement at this time as well.
Well, and that it's this idea that that Starfleet in general and these ships have gone from being smaller and more purely militaristic to what we get in the Next Generation, where it's more like a floating city with, flying city with like every single possible job you can imagine, but that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see that in Discovery.
Well, no, I get that they don't have like a psychic counselor, but just given that this is our civilization a couple hundred years in the future, it just seems like something that they would just realistically that they would have, given the size of the crew.
I feel like mental health is, their way of exploring humanism in Discovery. Like each of the shows kind of has its own way of being like, this is our version of how we think that humanism would work in this society, right? So I think that this Discovery's version is more like mental health is a natural part of life from, the time that a child is raised. So the idea that we would have a separate counselor to go to when something goes wrong is more like, mental health doesn't become part of life until you need it. And so, because like in general, I'm really comfortable and happy with the fact that this crew expresses emotions. This crew is happy and comfortable, expresses emotion. There've been people in fan groups who are mad about it, who are like, well, Burnham cries too much. And it's like, well, yeah, because what they're trying to say is that tears are healthy. When you're going through something that's genuinely traumatic, tears are a natural human response. And so, in TNG, we had this almost asexual, group of people that just never, that always felt like they had private lives that were hidden from us. right? That's why the last episode, when they all come together to play, to play poker, and Picard says, "Oh, I should have done this a long time." Like, they finally get to the point after 8 years together of, okay, I'm going to hang out with you now. But it's like they all had, private lives that were hidden mostly. We saw little glimpses of it here and there, but I feel like on Discovery, it's a more organic, more natural feeling where these people are automatically friends. They're working and living together. They're getting mixed up with each other. And it's just a much more natural, believable setting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's this conflict between, do you want relatable characters on Star Trek, or do you want aspirational characters on Star Trek? I'm more in the aspirational camp, but I'm willing to go either way. But how about Anthony? What do you think? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I think I'm more on the aspirational side, and certainly I think that was one of the reasons why, as much as I enjoy watching the Abrams films, they haven't really stuck with me the way a lot of other Star Trek has. But I think Discovery actually finds a really good balance. And I think sort of one of the signature moves that I noticed this season is that you get characters who are conflicted, and you actually see why they're conflicted, but that in the end, they make the sort of noble or correct choice. And I mean, sometimes that can just be a little moment where I think there are multiple shots where something terrible happens to Michael, and you see she's like frozen for a second or two, and then she remembers where she is, she remembers who she is, and sort of does, the heroic thing. And I feel like that's a smart way to sort of split the balance of not making them purely heroic, completely unrelatable, but at the same time not feeling like you have to have everybody just acting on your emotions all the time and shouting and basically acting like the characters in the Abrams films.
I guess I'll just add, I mean, that one thing that sort of struck me is that Captain Pike seems to be religious, or at least open to religion, in a way that I don't associate with Star Trek. I mean, I was always struck with this line Gene Roddenberry said, where he said something like, in the Star Trek future, everyone's an atheist and better for it. So, I mean, as a devout atheist myself, I kind of like the just give me my space atheists. But I don't know if this is maybe early enough in the timeline that some of the people are still...
like that quote as a fantasy, but I also think that it's tinged a little bit with the Roddenberry colonialism aspect.
Well, and the franchise over time has certainly become much more open to religion that you see, like, I guess, particularly in Deep Space Nine, maybe less human religion, but, with the Bajorans. And so I think that, in terms of the direction of the show, as opposed to sort of what makes sense in universe, I think it did start from this sort of purely kind of everyone is, there's no mention of religion whatsoever, and then it sort of slowly kind of creeps in as the world building becomes more complex. So I didn't have a problem with it here.
It also makes sense from a storytelling perspective that in order to show the atheism of a particular universe, you discuss what's wrong with various religions around you, right? And so, if you bring up religion, the whole point is to, sort of provide an allegory for the various things that are wrong with our religions. And so I see them doing more of that, which I think is a different way of arriving at the same conclusion. I mean, even the episode that they had, where they're all, the New Eden, right? Like, yes, they brought up religion, but only to explain that the whole reason why this religion exists is because of science and because of a historical event that they were not aware took place.
Well, right. I have no issue with, some aliens having a fake made-up religion based on misinterpreting super advanced technology and things like that. I mean, I really like that. But it just sort of struck me that Pike, I was just a little surprised that Pike himself was so religious in this show.
Well, it seemed like he was more that he was interested in the idea of faith and the idea of religion, but in the same way that like a comparative religion professor would be now, it doesn't necessarily mean they subscribe to a particular faith.
Yeah, like he said that his father was a comparative religion professor, which you would still have, people studying religions at that time.
Yeah, and I definitely never got the sense that he was practicing a particular religion as much as that, yes, he had the academic interest in it, and then he also may have had... I think he perhaps had a spiritual side to him, but not necessarily a religious side to the extent that there's a distinction between those two. Like, I don't think there was nothing that indicated to me that he defined himself as a member of any particular faith so much as he might have had some personal spiritual ideas about there being some things in the universe that maybe can't be explained or are beyond our understanding, and being open to that possibility.
Well, I mean, and like I said, I always like these episodes where, somebody's religion turns out to be a total sham. But I actually didn't really care for this episode where they, like you mentioned, where they go to the Terra Elysium or whatever, the New Eden thing. It just seemed really, I don't know. I felt like I was watching the Orville or something in that episode. It just felt kind of disjointed and not very. It didn't seem to have a lot of authority to me. I don't know if anyone else had that same impression of that episode.
To me, it was definitely one of the weaker episodes, if for no other reason that I think it felt like it wasn't a particularly well developed religion. It just seemed like they threw together a bunch of cliches and said this is a religion, and it was just very facile, and so didn't feel organic to me. It just felt like somebody's idea of what, let's make up a religion and throw in this, that, and the other cliche.
And you just don't see that much of the world. I mean, it's really this one character who's been searching for the truth, and then a little bit of the woman who runs the town, and that's basically it. So I think just because for that reason, it feels a bit thin.
Yeah, all right. So sounds like we're all pretty much in agreement there. I'm also getting my other main criticism sort of these early episodes, most of which I really liked and I thought were pretty strong, was my man Saru, my favorite character here. And so they have this episode where you think he's going to die, and I was legitimately broken up about that. And then he's sort of conquered his fear, his whatchamacallums fall off.
His ganglia.
Ganglia fall off. But then he's kind of totally off the reservation in the next episode. And, Pike says to him, just stay out of this for a second. And then he just jumps in. He's like, no, you will not do this to us anymore. And I mean, that kind of drove me crazy. Because again, I do want to see professionalism and
he's
people
going
being...
through puberty. He's basically going through puberty after losing his ganglia. I mean, I thought that was pretty clearly what they were trying to say there, that he this whole, there was a lot of parallels actually to his Dark Materials of this sort of species that effectively goes through puberty and is culled after going through puberty by, this other group that lives on the same planet. The name of them is escaping me right now.
The Baul.
Yeah. So, I thought it was a really cool way of sort of explaining that he finds out, no, this is just a natural part of the development of our race, where we lose our fear and sort of become, more empowered. And so, of course, the first couple months of that, he's sort of going to be drunk with power and totally, you get to see teenage Saru.
No, I get that it was a plot point that this is a biological thing he's going through. I kind of liked him the way he was, and I didn't like him yelling at people.
Did you? Because my feeling was that after that specific episode, which that was a plot point that he was going through this, is that there's still an element of that he's changed, but in a lot of ways, it felt to me like he went back to the Saru that we knew before. So it didn't feel like this wild swing, except in that one episode.
And I think that makes sense because it was, as we said, it was so close to him suddenly. It was kind of like, putting the emotion chip in Data or Lore. It's like they could go berserk because they've never had to deal with these sorts of feelings before. And so, it was, that same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, like I said, so the first half of this season is about following these red lights in the sky around and seeming like there's some sort of, agenda or something that they're supposed to fulfill. And I thought that I thought it was pretty solid, except for those episodes I mentioned, but I thought it was less good than the second half of season 1. But then it sort of takes this turn where it gets darker and we find out that that Starfleet, so there's this branch of Starfleet, which is sort of like the Black Ops intelligence spy agency called Section 31. And we find out that they had this sort of supercomputer that's kind of gone all Skynet on everybody and is taking over. And at that point, before we even get to that, the part where Pike goes down to the Talos 4, and there's the sort of, apparitions created with the telepathic powers. It was at that episode it kind of like I was like, wow, I'm actually really really into this now. And then we get into the the whole Section 31 thing, and I was just pretty much riveted by the show from that point on. And I just had this real feeling of just like unease, or I don't know how to put it, just I was just tense, and there's this sort of impending doom. But so Anthony, do you agree with me that did you feel like the show picked up sort of at the midpoint there?
Yeah, I mean, there were serialized elements before that. The Tilly storyline and the Hugh storyline that kind of led into each other. And so it wasn't like I was bored before, but I definitely noticed when I was binging this whole thing in preparation for this episode that like the earlier episodes I liked, but wasn't, it was definitely, I'm going to watch another one because I need to get through a certain amount, to be ready, versus once Spock returns, and then the Control storyline moves to the forefront. I mean, I definitely still have reservations and criticism, but as just sort of pure engaging storytelling, it basically locks in, and I just like tried to finish the rest of it as quickly as I could because I was fully engaged.
I mean, does anyone disagree that the season 2 gets better and better as it goes along?
I disagree with that. I mean, I feel like there are very few shows where I sit around thinking, well, was this episode better than that one? It's just not the way my brain works. But I tend to see it as one long movie. So season 1 is one long movie, season 2 is one long movie, and in part because they're doing this unique thing that really, they played with this in Deep Space Nine, but, this where they're telling this whole story as well as telling mini stories. I didn't have a problem with New Eden because it felt to me like a self-contained Star Trek. It felt like an episode of TNG. I think that's one of the ones that Frakes directed.
Mm-hmm.
And he did a great job. But I feel like I don't think it got better so much as Discovery is really good at spending the first couple episodes building up a backstory. And then all of a sudden, all of these details that we've been paying attention to start to explode and connect. And so I think that what you're observing is part of this, things are finally making sense, things are coming together, and there's that cohesive storyline that we're seeing where a main threat is emerging.
Yeah, it's partly inherent in the narrative structure.
Yeah.
But you didn't feel like it got worse toward the end. You're just saying it was equally strong throughout the season.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And I think I would agree with that too. I mean, I don't think it. I was pretty much on board from very early on. I think there were one or two episodes that I think were slightly, in hindsight, were weaker than some of the others. But again, I agree totally with what was just said, that the fact that you had, even though they were what felt like self-contained episodes, there were always these back and forth links between all of the episodes that you started to realize, this is interesting. It was kind of like a puzzle you were trying to piece together yourself and try to figure out, like, how are these episodes linked? Because clearly they are. I mean, you knew that the signals were linking them, but there were lots of other little clues being seeded in there, and that to me was fun from early on in the season as well. And it definitely did not get worse. It just continued to build and build and build and build, but I don't think it was building from a place where it needed to get better. It just was building momentum.
Were there any aspects of that puzzle that you feel like you put together before they were revealed in the show?
It's so hard to say now with 2020 hindsight. I don't know. I mean, because now I'm looking at it through the lens of knowing everything. I don't remember, honestly, so I don't want to claim that I did.
You
I remember thinking
Chris, no one's ever going to know. Just say that you figured it
yes,
all out.
I guessed it all.
Sorry, Sarah, what were you saying?
I do remember thinking that, the reveal that Michael was the Red Angel felt like a fake out, and I kind of knew that there was something else there. Especially because it would be sort of too obvious if it was Michael the whole time. Like, all the fan forums at the time were talking about, well, who's the Red Angel? And there were all these theories about various, aliens coming back from other series where we had seen them. Is it Picard? And, will they have like will this have something to do with the new Picard series? That kind of thing. And so it was always very interesting to watch that. But, I did feel like when they said it was Michael, I was like, there's something else there that they're not telling us. And there was.
Were there any just really dumb, like, or like off the wall or random fan theories about who the Red Angel was?
Oh yeah, but those are totally forgettable. Like this was like 3 months ago, so I remember going, well, that's dumb, but I don't remember what they actually had said because there's just so much quantity, and I can't help it. I get into it whenever, because we get each episode each week. There's whole like spoiler threads that are being posted in all of these groups where people go at it for 600 comments. It's hilarious.
Right, but so for people who haven't actually watched the show and are just following along, so it turns out that these signals are being sent back through time by this character called the Red Angel, who we realize by this point is some sort of humanoid in a super advanced time travel suit from the future. And so based on some sort of analysis, they decide it's Michael coming back from the future. Some sort of, I forget if it was DNA analysis or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so they concoct this plan. So basically, they're afraid that the Red Angel, by continuing to travel through time, is creating an opening for this AI from the future to come into their time and screw everything up. And so they're like, we got to take this Red Angel out of the equation. And I thought this was I said before, this was my favorite part of the season. And I don't think I've ever seen this in science fiction before. At least nothing comes to mind where there's this time traveler from the future and they know who it is in the past. And so they're like, all right, well, let's kill the person it is in the past. And this is going to force the version in the future to come back and save the version in the past because otherwise they won't exist. And then we can trap the time traveler from the future when they appear to save the past version of themselves. I thought that was totally brilliant. I was just riveted when that was going on.
And, well, that it was also both the plan and then also I think we got really good character moments too because we had Michael absolutely saying, I'm in, let's do this. And then all these characters, particularly Giorgio, who ostensibly are much more selfish or invested in other things. And it's sort of the way, the subtle and then not so subtle ways that it comes out that they really care about Michael and want to protect her. Just from like the pure drama perspective, I thought made that episode really strong too.
Yeah, and shout out to the very realistic portrayal of being in a different atmosphere. Like, when that had happened on TNG, it was like, there's some fog, and all of a sudden the characters are like, like, when you can't fucking breathe, and when the air is actively destroying your lungs and causing them to bleed from the inside out, and, like, that was a holy crap, that scene. Like, oh my God. That was generally anxiety inducing, which should be. Like, that's what the character would have gone through.
It was reminiscent of some scenes I've been watching recently in Chernobyl.
Yes, quite.
Yeah.
The only thing that sort of I was surprised none of the characters brought up was, isn't it likely that Michael in the future knows something we don't about is doing these things for a good reason? Because, like, we know Michael is a, well-intentioned, smart person. And so if, is capturing her really that good of an idea? I mean, I could see why they might want to do it anyway. I was just surprised that conversation never happened.
It didn't that it didn't come up and then there was a reason why we have to do this anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so somebody mentioned Giorgio. I just want to say, like, I loved that character in this. So she, she's the emperor from the alternate timeline, and then she becomes a high-ranking, spy for Section 31. And I thought she was fantastic in this, and that she's kind of, manipulating people, but she seems to, like, her heart's basically in the right place because she has some sort of emotional connection with Michael, but you never really know. I thought there was a pretty high chance that she was going to end up absconding with the data sphere thing herself, and then that she was going to be the main villain in season 3 or something. Obviously that didn't happen, but it was set up that you thought maybe that might happen. I guess I didn't explain about this data sphere. So at some point in the first half of the season, they get this data sphere where it's like the Library of Alexandria, and it just has all this information. And then it turns out that this AI needs this data sphere to, achieve full consciousness. And so I guess I'll just say, so then it turns out that the Red Angel is actually Michael's mom, and that she didn't die like we thought she did. She'd actually been transported into the future and has been coming back over and over again, trying to fix things, but has decided that the data sphere, all her efforts to destroy it, have proven futile. And so she had planted it in the past in the path of discovery, hoping that they would figure out something to do with it. Do I have that all right? Anything else we need to explain about that?
More or less. I again, though, that's one of those really amazing, dark psychological turns where you have those scenes of her sitting in, like, basically alone in the entire galaxy in the future. Like, the whole rest of the galaxy is a wasteland.
Yeah, I had a bad mushroom trip like that once.
This is maybe kind of a dumb question, but what is she eating in the future in which everything has been destroyed? I guess she probably has some sort of replicator, right? Yeah.
She's going back in time to eat and then coming back.
Well, see, that's what I was wondering. Does she have to?
Yeah,
does she have to make trips? And she just like shows up at McDonald's and just orders a bunch of food and then disappears again or something.
Getting back to Giorgio, by the way, one thing that maybe I just missed an explicit answer to this. And by the way, I agree. She's a lot of fun. I love watching her character on screen. But it's never entirely clear to me who exactly knows her real identity. Obviously, it's clear that some people do. But then, does everyone in Starfleet? I don't think so. But then it's like, no. Who does?
Pike didn't know. Right. So if Pike doesn't know, given that he's high ranking, then clearly only a couple of people at Section 31 know, in addition to the people who lived through it. So Michael knows. Right.
I mean, it's not even entirely clear to me who. Are we to assume that everyone from the original crew knows it, or not even that? I don't know. I'm very. That was a question that I often had. I'd be in, I'd have a scene with her in it, and I'd be like, "Wait, does that person know who she is?" Anyway, again, I might have just missed something with that, but
I had a related response where I just forgot for long stretches of the show that people don't know that about her, and then, once every few episodes there'd be a reminder, and I'd be like, "Oh, right, this is supposed to be a secret," but they don't really develop that in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, the original Giorgio was really famous and died in spectacular fashion. So you would think that most people in Starfleet, if they encounter this Giorgio, would know that she can't be the original. Unless, I don't know, did they have some cover story?
Well, they shipped her off to Section 31, right? So, she wouldn't be serving closely with members of Starfleet that she had been serving with before. So they probably just, in order to not let get it out, that in order to remain classified that she was, part of the mirror universe, they probably just said, "Oh no, she's working at Section 31 now," and that's the end of it. And most people just accept that.
But
right.
How would Pike
There's some
not
sort
know?
of cover story that they invented, Pike, I think, in season 1.
Yeah, I mean, these organizations have always been very, like, you're on a need-to-know basis. So there's no reason that Pike would have known because, he wouldn't
he have known that the original Giorgio died in the Battle of the Binary Stars? Like, you would think he would keep up on news.
But
like
I think that what they were saying with that was that they sent out an official Starfleet press release saying, right. "Oh, by the way, Giorgio didn't die. She was on a secret mission, and now she works for Section 31." Something along those lines. Yeah. But I don't know. It didn't bother me. It was one of those things that it sort of, you're supposed to infer that things have happened, but that Pike wouldn't know. And that actually ended up being a really interesting conversation with her and Michael Burnham, or, Pike and Michael Burnham, where they're talking about, where Pike's going, "This all doesn't add up." And she's like, "Yeah, I know. It's a long story. I'll tell you sometime." And I actually wish that they had included that scene on screen, because I think it would have been interesting to watch, Michael explain all of this to Pike.
I mean, doesn't he wink at Giorgio right at the end, indicating he does know?
Maybe he knows more than, he let on, or maybe they did have that conversation, but they had it off screen.
Right.
All right, so let's see. So then we have, like, a giant space battle.
Are we going to talk about Arium?
Oh, we can talk. Yeah, okay, go ahead, Sarah. Talk about Arium.
Well, I really loved that episode. Like, I loved that episode. That episode, to me, felt like, the standalone episodes that you, sort of refer back to when you talk about what makes Star Trek special. And you talk about the inner light, or you talk about Measure of a Man, that kind of thing. Like, and it was such a accomplishment that they, a lot of people complained about this, actually. They're like, well, they had this character in the background, and then all of a sudden they explored just enough of her character so that they can kill her off, and they were upset about it. And to me, I thought it was a brilliant decision because, she's been with us all along this, I actually called her Daft Punk to my partner. I was like, oh, Daft Punk is here in this scene, and I love her. And she was always sort of in the background, and she was one of the characters that you wanted to see more of, right? And so when they finally do, you are introduced to this idea, well, something happened with her in the sphere data where, something pierced her eye or entered her or whatever and corrupted her. Because she's, an augmented human. And so the fact that she, they sort of wove together this story in just one episode of having us recognize that she is this loved character, that Tilly loves her, that she has this strong bond with the rest of the crew, and then gives herself for her friends and begs Michael to, throw her out of the airlock. And I've watched this episode 3 times, and all 3 times I've just lost it, totally crying.
Yeah. I agree. I agree it was good. I'm a little bit with the people who would have liked to see more development. It's a very obvious choice that they've made not to develop the bridge officers that much. We don't, a lot of them, I'm still not sure even what their names are. I think if it were up to me, I would have gotten rid of the Culber coming back to life plotline and used that time to develop some of those characters more. But I don't know. I thought it worked pretty well the way it is. I don't have any huge problems with it.
It feels like in general this season they tried to shine a little bit more of a spotlight on the bridge crew, but 20% more, not really developing them fully the way we've necessarily seen with some of the other Star Trek series.
But at the same time, we, in TOS, how long was TOS on before they did anything with Sulu? That was sort of a standard, there are primary bridge characters and there are secondary bridge characters. And those bridge characters, very rarely, even with Uhura, I think it took a long time to really get a sense of who Uhura was, other than this beautiful, comms officer that was sort of, there to in the initial episodes provide eye candy. It took a while for them to really do anything with her character. So I feel like it's sort of, while I agree, I would love to see more of Oh is super compelling, some of the other characters, and Kayla, I really, at the same time, I feel like it's actually more traditionally Trek, that they have done that in the past.
Well, I first of all, I totally agree. It was one of my favorite episodes. I thought it was really, really emotionally powerful. I also feel like it didn't bother me because it felt to, the fact that it sort of seemed to come out of nowhere with her character. But because I feel like that, again, is kind of a callback to this tradition. There have been these favorite episodes of mine, like the one from Next Generation, The Lower Decks, where they...
Yeah.
They'll suddenly just have an episode with completely unknown characters who are, were working in the lower decks. Or they did a couple of episodes of that in Voyager, too, with the sort of underperforming members of the crew that suddenly were in the limelight. And I feel like it was kind of like a bridge officer version of one of those episodes, but it was also, they had planted these seeds in their earlier episodes with the data being implanted in her head and her mind being controlled. So, you had a little build up to it, but it felt like one of those episodes to me. And just like those episodes, it stood out to me as really, really powerful and memorable.
Yeah.
All right. So then we get to the giant space battle. I was really impressed. Well, actually, before we get to the giant space battle, so they decide that they have to, first they're going to try destroying the sphere data by blowing up, evacuating Discovery and then blowing up the ship in classic Star Trek fashion. But this was another thing to me where I'm like, I don't know why they think this is going to work, because I thought that Michael Burnham's mother had established pretty clearly that it was impossible to destroy the sphere data. And it seems like after, all the time she had spent trying different ways and different timelines, it seems like you would at least doubt pretty seriously that this is going to work.
someone should have at least, I did feel like there should have been a line where somebody says, well, what if the sphere data tries to protect itself? And somebody else says, there's no way that it can be that advanced to infiltrate our ship systems or something like that, to that level. Where because they're used to, they have multiple levels of security to initiate auto-destruct, right? And so they're using this ship actively. There's no reason for them to think that it had, that it would have those powers or develop them if it was threatened. And yet, at the same time, there is. So I do feel like they could have resolved that, moment of unbelievability to have somebody suggest it as an option. Like, hey, guys, this might happen. And for that character to end up being correct.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be, somebody says, why don't we try blowing up the ship to destroy the sphere data? And someone says, like, do you think that's going to work? Like, and they just say, like, well, do you have a better idea? And the person's like, well, no. And they're like, all right, well, let's do that then,
Exactly.
But so actually they do come up with a better idea, which is they're going to transport the sphere data far into the future, and they're going to build another time travel suit from the schematics that they've gotten their hands on, and Michael Burnham is going to lead Discovery far into the future where this AI is never going to be able to get the sphere data. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know what you guys, and I thought the special effects were just mind blowing, like just for a TV show. God. I was just like, holy.
The evacuation corridors. I'm pretty sure I jizzed my pants. I was, I don't know if that's possible, but that was amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Right. It felt like the special effects were on the level of the feature films, of the Abrams feature films. There was no point where I felt that the budget, came up short or anything. It seemed like whatever crazy, and obviously I think in the premiere and the finales where you see these particularly impressive special effects, but it just felt in general like whatever they wanted to do, they did it and it looked good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even when it's not the big space battles or whatever, but like every shot on this show is like a beautiful painting or something. I mean, even there would just be scenes where, Captain Pike is sitting at his desk and they're having a conversation, and it's like this, they're all blue, and then there's like this yellow light coming in through the viewports, and it was just gorgeous. I mean, I would get distracted just looking at how pretty the colors were, and have to go back and watch the dialogue again.
Yeah, the attention to detail of this show and the fact that they finally have a proper budget for the first time in Star Trek history, really, of the series, is one of the things I think that sets Discovery apart.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the fact that the technology has reached the point where you could do something like this on a TV budget.
Well, I mean, they have $8 million per episode. Imagine if they had $8 million per episode of TNG.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the budget was, but my sense was that for the time, TNG was a very well-budgeted show. It's just that was still way below what you could do in feature films, and so just that stuff dates.
Yeah, and television in general has changed. Like, we have bigger budgets for television now because television is so much more important now. Like, ever since The Sopranos and the sort of dawn of the golden age of television and all of that, and the fact that we have huge cultural events set around TV shows, in general, they have so much more flexibility to explore. That's why I get mad when people are mad about paying money for the app or paying money to watch Star Trek. And I'm like, really? You really want your Star Trek to stop in the middle of a battle so that you can watch a baby food commercial? Seriously? Is that what you're asking for right now?
I think in the TNG days, I think just making that ship with all the viewports and lights and everything fly past the camera, I think that cost like $8 million using the technology at the time.
Right. I partly just think that because I remember Doctor Who producers complaining about how their budget their budget was like 1/8 the budget of TNG. So they were always just like, come on.
But yes, so we have this amazing space battle. Giorgio manages to trap, control the AI, which is, I don't know if we even mentioned, is taken over the body of Leland, the head of Section 31. And kind of tricks him and manages to knock him out just before Discovery travels into the future. Did you guys know that who thought this? And so I assume in season 3 they're just like in the future. They're just far in the future, and we're not gonna. It's all gonna be all new aliens and all new worlds and stuff. Or does everyone think that's what's gonna happen?
That's
Yeah,
my
Kurtzman,
guess.
I think, was interviewed and said that they're going to face a new crisis. So I don't think they're going to, do anything like say that Control is still there in the future and is still after the data. I think they, from what I read in this interview, I feel like they're actually just going to go in a completely new direction and have a new foe.
Yeah, and I think that's cool because I enjoyed the show well enough, but after all the prequels, you had Enterprise, and then you had the J.J. Abrams movies, and then you had this. It's kind of like I've always like, let's just go beyond, Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and like see what happens in the future of the Star Trek. So, I don't know if we necessarily had to go 1,000 years into the future, but that works.
Plus, after watching what happened to Game of Thrones, I really appreciate
no spoilers.
Oh, no.
I'm not going to say anything specific about Game of Thrones, but I do appreciate when they wrap up things at the end of each season, because if they have an overall story that they're trying to tell, which is like a mystery, and that lasts several seasons, it's almost like you're just begging for them to be like, oh yeah, it was heaven. So I feel like I really appreciate it when they wrap up things, major plot points at the end of each season, and start new ones so that, they don't lead us along for 8 years and then, shit the bed.
Well, now, have any of you watched the Short Trek webisodes?
I have not.
Yes.
So
they're great.
Yeah, they are actually fantastic. I mean, if you haven't, you definitely should. There's only 4 of them for season 2.
Why don't you just, Chris, explain what those are?
So they made like little 15 to 20 minute, four of them episodes that they're calling short treks that are set during the timeline of season 2, that are, basically like full episodes, except only 15 minutes long. They focus on one like little incident, basically. So for example, the Queen Mahani Ikahali Kapo that what's her name, Tilly, is friends with toward the end of this season, that helps build the drive that gets them to go into the future. That is all planted in the first of these webisodes. You see how they meet each other. And then the reason I bring them up is, so in one of these episodes, which was a great one, possibly my favorite one, called Calypso, that episode is set 1,000 years in the future. And so I think it's conspicuous that those numbers match up with how far in the future they say they're going. And so we may end up, and this isn't, other people have speculated this too. It's not my own original thought, but we may end up in some form of that future where the protagonist in that episode is fighting against what seems like some nefarious overarching enemy that's referred to as the Vidraish. And a lot of people have said, well, Vidraish sounds like a morphing of the word Federation. And could it be that 1,000 years in the future, the Federation has become some huge evil empire type of thing? Or, it's hard to say if the protagonist in this episode was actually a good guy or a bad guy, because you don't really know too much about the wider story. But anyway, the point being, that may be a little glimpse of the future that we're going to see.
Well, and the writer of Calypso is the main writer on Picard, on the Picard series.
Ah, okay.
Michael Chabon or Cabon?
Michael Chabon, yeah.
Chabon, thank you. Yes.
Oh, so wait, he's the main writer on Picard, you said? On
He's
the TV
one of the
Yes.
writers, at least.
One of them.
Oh, that's
Or
really
maybe
cool.
the main one, yeah. And by the way, wait, so Dave, have you watched the webisodes?
I didn't. I just heard about I binged this and I just finished watching it yesterday, and so I didn't even hear about these webisode things until just like literally 20 minutes before we started recording.
Oh, okay.
So I did go and watch Calypso because it was 18 minutes long,
Right.
but I haven't watched the other ones.
Well, I loved Calypso also because it includes, and I never thought I'd see Audrey Hepburn in a Star Trek
that was
episode.
awesome. That was
she's,
so awesome.
one of my all-time favorites, so that was great. But also, you should watch the one that comes after that, because you actually get to see the original Giorgio in an episode, not the replacement Empress.
Well, but like what you were saying about in the one I watched, the main character, the main human character, is fighting against some force that for whom Betty Boop is a cultural reference point.
So clearly, it's an Earth-based
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I believe Betty Boop would still be a cultural force 1,000 years in the future, but
I mean, I think that's part of one of the things you have to accept with Star Trek in general is that they'll sort of nod towards the idea that there's been culture since the 20th century, but in general, all the characters are primarily interested in 20th century cultural references.
Right.
And that's just how it is.
maybe they just have a religion. They just all worship Betty Boop.
Well,
So terrifying.
Well, isn't part of the thing in Calypso though that the computer pretty much only had Earth's history to keep it company? And so part of that whole thread was not that the society that existed at that time was obsessed with Betty Boop, but that the computer that had nothing but nostalgia in its memory banks to talk to, basically, was obsessed with Betty Boop.
Well, no, but I thought that the human, he mentions Betty Boop independent of what the computer's interests are.
He had been watching it on the escape pod, which he stole from his enemy's ship, which is the Vidray ship. So, yeah. But it's exciting. I'm definitely excited to see what this version of the future is. I mean, I think they definitely piqued my interest with that.
Yeah, by the way, Michael Chabon is a big old tease. He has an Instagram. He posted a picture, just a black JPEG, and he said, "I have a picture on my phone regarding the new Picard series that would break the internet if y'all could see it." And everyone was like, "Stop doing that to us."
So are you guys excited about the Picard show, or do you have any misgivings or anything?
No.
Just pure enthusiasm?
I mean, I'm always amazed in the forums that there's already people who are already complaining about the new Picard series, because of course they are. And it's seriously, first of all, it's a miracle, an absolute miracle that they got Patrick Stewart to do this. People always ask, in earnest, they honestly ask why he doesn't do the conventions. And it's hello, he doesn't have to. All the other actors are doing these conventions because it's a great supplement to their income. He doesn't need to do those. He has an astounding career outside of Star Trek. And it's people just aren't aware of that, or they just don't know how these things work or something. But people are already complaining about the new series. And it's just mind-boggling to me because it's so amazing that we get to have this. And I guarantee that Patrick Stewart's taste is well beyond all of us put together. And so if he likes it, and he had to like it in order to say yes. He said, "I'm only going to do this if you're going to do something interesting with the character and take the character somewhere that we haven't been before." He has no interest in redoing TNG episodes. And there is going to be a contingent of the fan base that is angry that they're not getting that, even though he flat out said, "This is not what we're going to do."
Has there been any indication, is this going to be 10 episodes and done, or is this going to be seasons of Picard in the future?
I think that they actually initially signed up for more than one season, but I'm not sure if I'm remembering that correctly. But if it's successful, then, obviously they'll give Stewart as much money as he needs to do more. So pipe your complaining down, jerks. This is why we can't have nice things.
And apparently they're doing a Section 31 spin-off show, too?
Yes.
Does anyone know any more? I just saw the headline. I assume that Ash Tyler and maybe George O are going to be in that.
I think that's why they both ended up, not going with Burnham.
It wasn't actually clear to me. Did we see George O get off Discovery?
Because when I heard about the Section 31 show, I assumed it was going to be about her. And then when my reading of the finale was that she was on the ship when it jumped into the future, or at least I didn't see any clear indications that she wasn't.
Oh, maybe she wasn't. It was just the other one that, that went off, Ash.
Well, they appointed him head of Section 31 now.
Yeah.
Or acting head, at least. I don't remember.
Well, no, he was acting, and then they said, "We're taking acting out of your title."
Oh, I see. That's what it was, right.
Maybe George O steals the time suit and travels back in time, and that's why they don't have a time travel suit anymore.
Does anyone have any theories about who the guy was that they showed the half face at the end? Remember? The end of the
I just thought he was
finale?
some Starfleet administrator, but you think he was somebody special?
I think they were intentionally obscuring the upper half of his face for some reason.
Maybe.
To say that he was someone that we'd find out who he was in the next season or something.
I just thought he was supposed to be some faceless Starfleet bureaucrat, and so, it didn't really matter what he looked like, but I guess we'll see.
The fan forums. I'm not the only one who thought that. There are a lot of people on the fan forums was like, what were they saying? Is Control still alive, or is that someone we should know? So if they didn't intend anything by it, they sure shot it in a creepy way.
Yeah, I could genuinely imagine it going either way. Like, I definitely just saw it as just a random Starfleet bureaucrat, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were setting something up. But I also wouldn't be surprised if people were making a big deal out of something that they didn't really.
Oh, yeah. We'll definitely do that. Right.
So, Sarah, do you feel like following these fan forums, does that add to your quality of life? Or do you, you just can't stay away?
I ask myself that every day.
Or does it just raise your blood pressure?
Yeah, I ask myself that every day. There are genuinely entertaining. Yeah, it's almost as if, unfortunately, the fan forums that are the ones that are most entertaining, that add the most to my life, are also the ones that frustrate me the most. And so it's not an option to just, and people try so hard to form their own off groups, and then they get really fascist, and people are like, banning other people because they disagree with them and stuff like that. And some of the smaller groups are actually where you have the most trouble. So when you have the big ones that are sort of moderated well, my favorite is Star Trek shitposting. It is hilarious. It is occasionally disturbing, but the mods are really good, and that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, since I binged it, and Anthony too, I guess we must not have read any stuff in between episodes. I mean, Chris, did you follow any online discussions or anything?
I have not been, no.
Yeah, I would say that, I was binging this sort of, the beginning of me binging this was the tail end of Game of Thrones, and that was something where every week I was reading every theory, well, probably not every theory because I think people go really deep, but there was so much speculation and so much anticipation, and my experience of this was almost completely the opposite, where it was just pure, just going through the episodes, and it felt like such a relief to not have this sort of incredible weight of expectation and anticipation attached to every single hour, and instead just to treat it as a story on its own terms. That was really nice.
I also tend to not follow those sorts of fan sites only because I'm super weird about spoilers. And even though these are just fan theories, it's like a clock, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And so I feel like just the fact that someone might spoil something for me that actually I would, it is going to be what happens. I like to avoid them for those reasons too, but that's just me. I'm just weird.
So have they gotten you to sign up for all access, on an ongoing basis, or do you just sign up for it, watch Star Trek, and then cancel it?
I have not canceled it yet, but I think that's mostly out of inertia. I've thought about canceling it and then re-upping it once they start airing Picard or season 3, whichever comes first. But I don't know. I feel like, you know what? I'm really pleased with the fact that I've gotten as much entertainment out of watching the show that I have. And so if it means I pay an extra $20 or $30 until the next season starts, spread out over, smaller.
Well, they've got other great stuff on there. Like they have the Twilight Zone, the new Twilight Zone is really good. And, they have realized that their ownership of Star Trek is a cash cow, and they are, bringing out new series. So we are year-round subscribers. And for the moment, we're just watching, Discovery, again on the off season after it finishes, as well as when it rolls out. And hey, they have the original Beauty and the Beast with Linda Hamilton and Ron Perlman, all the episodes, which is an amazing show that George R.R. Martin worked on as a writer, by the way.
It is interesting that we went from this period where I think probably everyone on this podcast was roughly of an age, growing up in the late 80s and 90s where there was always a Star Trek show on, sometimes multiple Star Trek shows on. And then obviously there was this drought period where there was nothing, and then just, a big budget movie every few years. And now we're suddenly going to have Star Trek on all the time again. Mm-hmm. And I definitely have mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, I'm excited to see what people come up with. And I think also when you have a bunch of different creators doing different shows, there's an opportunity for experimentation and for, stuff that's really different. But I also worry that, that it starts to not feel special anymore, the way that like when Discovery came back, it was this feeling of real excitement. And in some ways, the way that like Star Wars movies suddenly, went from are starting to feel a little bit less like an event. I worry there's going to be a similar feeling around Star Trek.
Yeah, that's why personally I would prefer that they tell like self-contained stories and then, with an ending in mind, and, just do that and not necessarily like try to make everything as many seasons as are minimally economically viable.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're pretty much out of time, so I don't want to just bum everybody out with that thought. But I don't know, any other final thoughts?
I'm fine with it as long as the more Star Trek, the better, as long as they don't split resources. Like if they were to, reduce the writing staff of Discovery by half so that they could go work on the Picard show, that would upset me. But I don't think they're going to do that.
Yeah, as long as they keep the quality high, which, so far I'm encouraged by the way CBS is handling this, then I'm all on board. Going back all the way to DS9, back then I remember wishing that they would make a sort of buddy cop drama about Section 31 with O'Brien and Bashir in it, and because they both, had involvement with Section 31. So the fact that now we're getting some other version of a Section 31 drama, I think could be really interesting. There's a lot of, because they're such a nebulous organization, there's a lot of room for more of the sort of morally ambiguous storylines that you tend not to get in Starfleet when the focus is on Starfleet itself. And I think that could be a lot of, you could have a lot of interesting, it could almost feel like, even if that did become a multi-season show, because, a season could be going to infiltrate some planet or a different place, each season could feel very, very different. Or it could be almost like a True Detective type of format where, you have some sort of different Section 31 thing going on each time. But anyway, so I'm just excited to get all of it.
Anthony, any final thought?
Yeah, I guess I would say that there are other reservations I have about the writing that I'm not going to waste time, like, sort of going into detail on in terms of just, I think, Control
going back to the
sort
season 1 premiere, I have a few more things.
Yeah, I think Control is sort of underdeveloped. I thought that the way they explained the red signals was like way too convoluted and sort of convenient. And so I have like lots of like asterisks and things that I wasn't crazy about, but like the big difference is after the first season of Discovery, I was not excited about more Discovery. And after season 2, I was like, yes, I cannot wait. I want to see more.
Yeah, so I think maybe we'll just end on that, because I am excited to see, as I said, the future of the Star Trek universe 1,000 years in the future. If there's an evil Federation, that would be cool. And also with Picard, obviously, that's moving into the future, into uncharted territory, not just endless, prequels and things. So yeah, I think the future of the Star Trek franchise is looking pretty good right now, and definitely looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah.
And I think we'll wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Anthony Ha, Sara Lynn Michener, and Chris Cevasco. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's always super fun.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Anthony Ha, Sara Lynn Michener, and Chris Cevasco for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to Shelby Kruver, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.